and I'm so excited to get to know you. And
she's heard me talk about you so much.
Yes, heard Kristi talk about you so much. And I feel like I've had the opportunity to meet so many amazing people from around the globe because Kristi her social networking capabilities are bar none.
I love it. I'm so glad I was able to join you because I love your podcast. It's so fun.
And where are you? What fabulous place are you filming from today?
So I am currently in Paphos, Cyprus, which is the birthplace of Aphrodite.
As well it should be, and you are repping her well, girlfriend.
Yes.
We try. Going to her bath tomorrow.
Now, how long are you in Cyprus for?
So here for a week. It's interesting because before our trip, when we were planning our trip last month, was suddenly Cyprus was in the crosshairs in the news. And I feel like this happens to me all the time. Like I try to go somewhere and some big news story breaks. And so we are very close to Lebanon, where, as you know, I used to live in Lebanon.
Yes.
And the, Israel-Hezbollah conflict has been flaring up for the past few months. And there was concern that it was going to extend here in Cyprus because, there's a British base here, a lot of military moves happen here, the US and the UK. And Israel, actually, my GPS doesn't work here. It says that I'm in Beirut, specifically at the Beirut airport, which is close, but not that close, because Israel has to jam the signals so that Hezbollah drones can't use the GPS here to hit their targets in Israel.
Now, tell us a little bit, if I remember right, you're half Sicilian, half Iranian?
Yes.
Who said I had a stroke? Can you believe I remember that? Screw those people.
Family members don't remember that, and you did.
Well, I just have to tell you, I guess it was about a decade ago, you came to the ranch, and maybe 8 to 10 years ago, and you breezed in and you had a cross between That Girl, I'm dating myself, the TV show That Girl, who was a reporter, and just this sexy foreign correspondent flair, and you were like digging sand out of your ear from being in the desert, and I had to ride 2 camels and take a load of, ride on a load of chickens to get here, but I'm here. And I just remember, it could have been like a cartoon. My little girl was like, hearts were coming out of her eyes. I don't know what Miss Suzanne does, but I want to be a lot of that when I grow up.
Well, I love hearing this because now, because I was at the BBC then, right? So I was like,
right, you were at the BBC.
Of reporting on politics and foreign policy and national security, like all the nitty gritty. But now I've launched Helmet to Heels, which is really primarily geared towards young women like Sinclair, because I want to inspire that generation to become journalists and become diplomats and become women who are building peace and security and tech and all kinds of stuff that's traditionally been male dominated, but more importantly, to do it in style, because there's this sense that you can't be a woman who can do both, right? You can't be a woman who can be stylish and into fashion and glamorous for, as an example, but also be a foreign correspondent. And this is something that I battled with throughout my career. And it was only when I kind of felt like, okay, I've made it. And I've sat down and landed an exclusive with Mike Pompeo, the former CIA director, now Secretary of State. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to roll up to this interview wearing platform leopard print Jimmy Choos and pink silk DVF top. And he's like, the first words out of his mouth for you are relentless. Mind you, I had people be like, you can't be a fashionista and a serious foreign policy journalist. And I was like, what? So I hope that women like Sinclair
Eric Prince just took a distant second row when she finds out that you're doing this, and she can spend her summers tagging along behind you with Helmet to Heels.
But
She'll
you're
be over the
exactly
moon.
who I wish I'd had to look up to when I was that age, you know?
Yeah. How did you get from Atlanta, Georgia, to get us to college, get us to everything, the Reader's Digest version of what you are today?
Well, so it's funny because I actually grew up in a very conservative household. So like Persian, Sicilian, both of those cultures are very conservative. And like the thing that I was expected to do, quite frankly, was to marry well. I mean, like I could tell this story now because my family has evolved and they're very proud of me. Like quite frankly, it was like I had this amazing education. I went to Emory University. I studied abroad at Oxford. That was where my British journalism roots came from. And then once I graduated, I moved to Washington, D.C., and I did political journalism in Georgetown. So I had like this amazing resume, but none of that really mattered. I was just meant to marry well.
Yeah, you were meant to get your MRS, as we say in the South.
Exactly. And like, I've never actually told the story publicly, but like, okay, here we go. I'm ready to
We're here
now,
for
so
it.
I might as well start practicing. So I did
Exactly.
get my RS degree. I did. And, we were college sweethearts at Emory. And, at the time, we were a good match. We had a lot in common. But I always knew what I wanted. Like, journalism was in my blood in the sense that it was something that I was always drawn to. So, like, I remember watching news reports when I was like 6 years old. It was, it was like evening news. I remember clipping up news articles on Fridays when we had current events Fridays, because that was like our assignment. And so we had to scroll. We had to flip through back then, not scroll. We had to flip through the newspaper and find an article that we thought was interesting, flip it up, summarize it, handwritten on piece of paper, go in front of the class and present it. And then I literally got paid to do that like 15 years later. And so journalism was in my blood. It was something I really wanted to do. Christiana Kianpour reporting live from Iraq during the invasion. She was half Persian like me. So she was kind of my role model. And so when I told my family that I had decided to be a journalist, it was during the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, and my family had just spent a lot of money on my education. You know how much that cost.
Yes.
And they're like, hold on a minute. I was like, guys, I have a job. It's in Washington, D.C. And they're like, oh, great. I was like, it's at NBC News. And they're like, okay, cool. What are you doing? And I said, I'm going to be a journalist, but I'm starting out delivering mail. I'm starting out delivering mail to the people that I want to be like Savannah Guthrie and Andrea Mitchell. But I promise it'll pay off. I mean, they looked at me like I was insane, but it was kind of okay because I'd already gotten my MRS degree. I'd already secured the bag in their eyes. And sure enough, a year later, I was following Obama around, so it did pay off. And then the Arab Spring happened in 2011. My background was in conflict and security in the Middle East, conflict resolution. No one in the Bureau really knew anything about the Middle East. In fact, they were like, hey, you're Persian. Can you come translate this thing in Arabic? And I'm like, two totally different languages. I mean,
now, how many languages do you speak?
So Farsi,
or at least
obviously English on a good day. Conversational in Spanish. Italian and French kind of gets mixed up. I'm learning Arabic and studying Arabic, so I can get by. I can read it and write it. It's the same script as Persian. So yeah, so that's where I'm at.
So yeah, Sinclair took the prerequisite. Now they start them in kindergarten, but the 12 years of Spanish, and she's been taking, actually, since you came to the ranch, I realize now where she got it. She's been taking Russian.
Amazing. Good for her.
Since like 6th grade, and now she has signed up for German, 1 and 2?
Yeah.
And I'm like, why? And she's like, you
my
just
obligation.
I guess, right? That's so good. So I ended up on the sort of Russia beat because of the whole Mueller investigation, and then these allegations about Trump's ties to Russia. So I suddenly had to go deep into the Russia rabbit hole. And whoo, That rabbit hole is deep. Like it is.
You should have called Sinclair. 2 words that would get her out of her room was, well, to Russian collusion or Kim Jong-un. Wait, what? What? She can talk about that until your ears bleed.
Yeah.
I think we need to get Sinclair on a Helmet to Heels internship. That's what we need to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I remember it was so funny that Pompeo came to A&M to speak at the Bush School, I'd say maybe about 3 years ago. And so trustees and regents and things, they give a early, invitation and let you know this is going to be here and some VIP sitting. So all of a sudden he comes out and there are, I guess, what you would call State Department, Secret Service types that travel with him. And then we had our own campus police. And so we had to get there 2 hours early in this little auditorium at A&M, probably held 400 people. So we're right dead center waiting for him to come. And I just feel when Pompeo walked out, I explained to Sinclair, I said, you understand, this is kind of a recruiting trip for him. In other words, when Bush 41 was alive, he had certain provisions that if you want to benefit said Bush School, you'll need to pay it forward and come back and speak to the kids there. And so, Gates comes and Pompeo and Condi and all the different people come and make their obligatory appearances. He could have looked at Sinclair and said, just meet me at Air Force 2. She'd have been, Mom, just mail my stuff, get his address. So she would have left so fast. Well, there was some young people. They looked post-grad, but they were dressed in fatigues. They were there, and they were a plant. And they started chanting, all sorts of negative things, and why do you allow blood wars? And I mean, Sinclair got those Secret Service. Get over here and do your job. In other words, we only have so much time here. How dare you? The freedom of speech, sit your asses down. And I was like, whoa, who's that child? But yeah, she just foreign. And I think you really kicked that off for her. And then I remember, was it the G6 that they were inviting Putin and Kim Jong-un? And it was about 2000 and, 11, 12, 13, something like that. And she was supposed to leave to go to camp. And you know how it is in the South, you register them from camp when they come out of utero. And that is your spot. And she's like, Mom, I can't. I said, honey, I will tape it. No, I have to see this. I said, well, I don't think that they're going to let you. She goes, I'm going to have to miss this term and go the next term. I said, yeah. There have people that died that had presidential connections that's not happening. And she wrote this beautiful 2-page letter to the lady that owned the camp and said, I understand this is an important responsibility, and I've had this position for a long time, and I certainly don't want to offend anyone. But at 4 a.m. on this day in summer, I have to be there when I watch Kim Jong-un cross over the DOC to come to this. She had the whole thing passionately written out, and she was probably 11. And they let her. And they were like, how do you...
I feel like that is, I'm afraid, not as common anymore. And I really feel touched to hear. I don't feel necessarily touched. I feel encouraged to hear that.
You had such a big impact on her. Left an indelible impression on that child.
Well, the fact that, does she know where she's going to school?
Yeah, she's going to Emory.
Yeah.
I think, yes. And she has a little flirting with the Oxford, but she'd love to end up at Georgetown and anything to do with politics.
Well, she can do the Oxford program. So at Emory, they have a relationship that she can do the Oxford exchange program.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
so to go and study abroad, and I really encourage that. I really encourage it. I mean, it definitely was the reason why I ended up going down the path that I did.
Well, she, what was it that she definitely loves the foreign correspondence part. She has decided to get her undergrad in economics. And anytime she wants to make her dad mad, she just says, I'm going to be an environmental lawyer. Leave me alone. Of course, she's not.
But it's so good that she's, you know what? People are like, do you know, I actually didn't get into the Emory journalism program.
You're kidding.
I did not get into the Emory journalism program. And then about a decade later, they were like, they offered me the Young Alumni Award. And they said, as a distinguished graduate of the Emory journalism program, I was like, hold on a minute. Y'all don't get to claim me. That is the political science program that gets to claim me. They're like, oh, we won't mention that. I'm like, no, I want you to mention that because I want to show to the women and men coming up behind me that just because one or a group of people reject you, don't see your value, doesn't mean anything.
Well,
So
we
not
absolutely
majoring in journalism.
fell in love with Emory, and it's just, I can tell it's going to be the perfect fit for her. It's just enough Southern values and brilliant people, and it's quite the melting pot of different cultures and backgrounds, and it's really a neat city.
Okay, I want you to get more back into
right next door to it. I literally grew up. My high school, Druid Hills High School, was right next door to Emory.
Now, what your parents were they? Just to touch on them, were they journalist backgrounds? Were they? Because when I was when you talked about Savannah Guthrie, I wanted to be Jessica Savage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, she didn't even know who that is. Yeah, dating myself. But yeah, she was one of the first women, and then that blonde that she just had this haze. Anyway, she ended up, I don't know, being a coke addict and died in a wreck. And anyway, tragic.
But take us back to the story of.
This is the thing about this industry, though, and again, this is another part of what I'm speaking up about now, and encouraging young women to come into this industry, but also to not fall into the trap that, I in sometimes myself and my fellow colleagues fell into, which is like this idea that it has to completely consume you, and it's like all or nothing, which I'm getting into this in my book, and it's kind of like anti-feminist. I'm sure it will be taken as anti-feminist, but like I need to be like heard out for it. It's like part of, I'm calling it the gold digger scam, where, what happens is, as women who are highly ambitious and driven, we are at risk of getting taken advantage of by the people in charge, who are still largely men, because we're hungry, we're hustlers, and we're going to work. But the fact of the matter is, we have a biological clock. And I encourage all young women to be cognizant of your biological clock early. I didn't get to that point until I was about 32. And I was like, wait a minute. And so, like, Barbara Walters was my Jessica Savage. I wanted to be like her. I read her memoir when I graduated.
Barbara Walters was Jessica Savage's. She was, right? Barbara Walters was everybody, yeah.
She was all of ours, our kind of holy grail. But when you read her memoir, it's sad. Like, she had to give up so much of her personal life. And I remember really struggling with that, being like, wait, so like, can I not have it all? Or do I really need to like check off the marriage thing ASAP, so that I can make sure that like I have that sorted out, so that I can have my career? Because I even at that age, or age 22, I saw that these two things were kind of in conflict with each other. And what ends up happening is, like, you give your career your all, and then you reach that point where it's like your body is screaming at you, your biological clock is screaming at you, and yet you end up having to choose, because it's like the corporate news culture, at least, like, still at that point was not set up for moms and CEOs. Right. So if you're a mom and a CEO, but like, we're changing that. We are changing that because there are more women in charge. The only way that will change is if there are women in charge. And I think like it's interesting that we're seeing the Kamala Harris stuff now saying she's childless and therefore she doesn't get it. But like I push back against that mainly because like, you know, I have a bit of a tragic story in that like when I was born, shortly after I was born, my mom and my dad were super madly in love, even though I'm a child of conflict. They met in Alabama during the Iran hostage crisis, and Iranian father, you know, Sicilian American mother, Sicilian grandfather wasn't so.
So this is in about
terrorists
78, 79? When is
So
this, 78?
1980, when the hostages
80.
were still. Yes, that was when we met. I mean, I wasn't born
Okay.
until way later, but when they met, like it was forbidden love. Like they ran
Right.
away to Texas and eloped. I was supposed
Jungle
to be in Texas.
love. Right.
They lived in Houston for a long time. Like I was supposed to be in Texas. So I feel
You
like
are.
at home when I come to
You are.
Texas. I feel like I am Texas. Right? And so but my mother had, you know, they didn't really understand postpartum depression at the time. They didn't understand mental health. They didn't have the technology and medicine that we have now. And so she just completely lost her mind. And so I was raised by other people, and including a stepmother. And so I feel really strongly about women early on in their careers thinking about what they want out of their personal life and factoring that in and planning for it, but not like rushing into it being like, oh my God, I need to like marry this guy that I met in college because I like check off the box, which is what I did and then undid. And then
We
now
all
I'm
have a
redoing.
mulligan.
So the starter, no.
Yeah.
Well, but for you, what was your wake up call from the first time you were married that as you
Yeah.
evolved in that marriage and in your, you know, professional and personal life that you had your personal wake up call that you said, hang on, maybe this isn't for me, or maybe I jumped into this before I was supposed to, or I made the wrong decisions out of social pressure before I was really ready to do it for myself?
So, I can't believe you guys are getting the story out of me. You guys are good journalists. So, I have always been the kind of person that I am now for the most part. Like, I remember being 5 years old and like thinking about how I was going to strategize, get what I wanted out of the people in my life. And that is still the case. It's just, you know, I want to get an interview with the president, and this is how I'm going to strategize to get it. Before it was like, how do I get
persuasion.
Lunchables at 2 a.m.? Like,
No, exactly.
and by the way, I did get my Lunchables at 2 a.m., so I was good. So, but I think at that time, I married someone who really wanted to be the person that I wanted him to be. And so he purported to be that person. And it was exciting. And, you know, like running around the world is fun and glamorous, or you think. And then suddenly you're in Beirut together and you're the guy. And your wife is running off to Iraq with a flak jacket and a helmet. And you're left behind. And, you know, your wife is the badass one being chased by, you know, has ISIS on their tail. I wasn't chased, but like I did have ISIS on. He did have ISIS on our tail. Like, we didn't know where they were. And it was dangerous time. And so that was kind of the end, I think. Like, if I went back and I saw, like, that was when the kind of feminine, masculine polarity that needs to exist in a heterosexual marriage, I can only speak to heterosexual marriage, my own experience, is like, I think once you don't have that, once that's off, you're in trouble. And so once we moved back to Washington, it just declined, and he was going down a path of, I mean, I'll respect his privacy and not go into a lot of details, but he was experimenting with a lifestyle that was not in line with my values and also would be a liability for me. And, you know, he was like, I don't want to live in your shadow. I want to be known as, you know, my name, his name, and not Suzanne Kianpour, his husband. And so I realized that my partner, my life partner, needed, and quite frankly, I woke up and I was like, at the time I was in my 20s. I woke up and I was like, one day I'm going to be 35 with you. 2 kids and a mortgage, and I feel like he's going to have run off with someone else, and I don't actually know what gender they'll be, which like wouldn't necessarily be a problem, but like, that was so I realized that my partner needed to be somebody who not necessarily was in my field, but needed to be adjacent to it at least, and someone who was very confident in their position in life and their masculinity, quite frankly.
And that respected your boundaries.
Exactly, and was proud of me, and also I knew it needed to be somebody probably a bit older, because it needed to be somebody who was it's funny, sometimes I think of words in Farsi and I can't think of like the best English word. So there's this word in Farsi that's like, it's called pokhte, which means someone who's cooked. So like, I needed someone who was, had really experienced life, and
probably somebody
play off of each other.
So self-assured that he could, lift you up and give you all of the support you needed to be as successful as possible without it demasculating him. I mean,
exactly.
Not
he
a Ben
needed to have
Affleck.
chutzpah.
Is my fiance now, he made this comment the other day where, so he's British and he's like a decade older than me, and he's also in the journalism industry. He says he's a journalist. He's not a journalist. Like, I don't know. But this is like a joke that we have with each other. And he said, it's like, I think the reason why this works is because I'm quite confident in my position in life, and I'm okay taking a back seat. And the funny thing is, like, I never looked at him thinking that he was taking a back seat, but I realized that actually he is in a support. He's like the Marty to my RBG, which is funny because when RBG was very ill, I had an interview with her friend, one of her best friends, and it was during COVID. I had like the worst breakup ever.
Anthony Scalia?
Sorry?
Her best friend, Anthony Scalia?
No. No. Unfortunately, I was interviewing her for the inevitable open. And then
for the what?
I started asking her about the obituary that we knew was coming. So it was July, and then she ended up passing away in September. And I asked her about her relationship with Marty. And I was like, where is the Marty to my RBG? I mean, the irony is he was right there all along. I just, yeah.
That was a fascinating documentary, and I advise everyone to watch it.
Yeah, it was very good.
And he was a comedian, her husband. He was in such a supporter and cheerleader of hers. And, then the relationship she had with Scalia. And that they were best friends, and they would go to the opera together. And I bet you the time he was missing her the most was when he was in Texas and nobody checked on him for 8 hours and found him in that. Yeah.
But we even, just to touch on the subject, we talked about it last night, is that 30, 40 years ago, there was this ingrained idea that women had an obligation if you came from a certain family, or you looked a certain way, or you had an obligation to marry a rich man that's going to provide for your family, so that you have the opportunity to be involved in philanthropy, or to, raise the children, have the family, cultivate the ideal image of that perfect family. And it's been a long time coming to bust open that stereotype and say that's not what it's supposed to be. And you have an obligation as a young woman to figure out your identity, to figure out who you are, what's your passion, what drives you forward. Yeah, you can be a wife and all these other things, also a mother, but you also have something else that's inside of you that you owe it to yourself to find what that is and give it a voice. And I think you're a great example. And I want to hear about you're the CEO of Helmets to Heels.
Yep.
And so how did that come about?
So, speaking of being in being in Iraq with ISIS on our tail. So that was almost 10 years ago. I know that was, it was August of 2014 when I was living in Lebanon in 2014. And then we heard about this horrible massacre that had taken place in Mount Sinjar, so like the northern part of Iraq. And it was August, and everybody's on holiday, and so like we couldn't get a hold of like any of our bosses. We finally managed to get a hold of one manager and be like, listen, we need to go. So we went with like a lean team to this area, where ISIS had horrible, I mean, Yazidi Christians, they had massacred the men, they had taken the women and children prisoner, they were raping the women. I mean, it was just awful. Like, it was awful. And I remember while I was there and I was doing interviews, and I mean, it's just so terrible when you're doing these interviews in the sense that, like, you realize you're re-traumatizing them because you're making them live through what they've just survived. And so, you kind of tell yourself, like, okay, maybe it's therapeutic for them, but then you're also re-traumatizing them. But, like, what I realized was there was no real space for the role of women in these conflict zones. And I covered various conflict zones, because, like, by that point, there was a Gaza war in 2014, and the Gaza war had just wrapped up. A couple of weeks prior, I'd landed an exclusive with the Hamas leader who lived in Doha. That was like a crazy story.
Mossad,
because it's like a Hamas, the Hamas.
Yep. And then you interviewed Mossad, didn't you?
No, at the time, that was 2014. So Hamas's leader then was a guy called Khalid Mashal. He kind of looked like an Arab George Clooney and spoke perfect English and was like eerily charming off camera. On camera, it's like, yeah. So, but I mean, the thing is, I mean, the commonality when you meet people like this, all kinds of leaders, regardless of what their political affiliations are, is like they have in common a sense of charisma, because that's what gets people to follow them, right? And so I noticed that we didn't have a space for the stories of women in conflict zones, and I noticed, like, just how much they were bringing the communities together. And at the time, the Iranian nuclear negotiations were happening, and so I was covering the Iranian nuclear negotiations and traveling with John Kerry, who was Secretary of State then, and he had a number of women on his negotiating team, and I really wanted to know what it was like being a woman in the negotiating room, because they're negotiating with the Iranians, where, like, you can't even shake hands with they couldn't shake hands with the Iranians when they reached a deal, because men and women are not allowed to touch, because it's such a conservative Shia Muslim country. In Sunni Islam, you can do that. In Shia Islam, you can't. And so this kind of, I started to see a theme. And I managed to get stories here and there on the BBC about this. But I recognized that we needed a more concentrated place. And, like, we need to be amplifying these voices, because we were talking about the problem a lot. I mean, that is what media does. That's our job. But, like, why weren't we talking about the solutions? And why weren't we talking about the people who were actually working on solutions and actually implementing them and being successful? Like in Colombia, for example, women were instrumental in ending the war with the conflict with the FARC. And so it took about 6 years of tenacious pushing, and I finally got my series Women Building Peace commissioned and launched. And our first episode was about Afghanistan, and it was a couple of months after the absolute disaster that was the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and just like, oh my God, don't get me started on that. And so I managed to get Hillary Clinton to speak directly to this Afghan girl who was hiding in a safe house, hiding from the Taliban, because the Taliban was hunting her family, because her family, her father specifically, had done work with the U.S. government. And, we had all these people left behind, like these allies, people who risked their lives for us, left behind. And, like, my cousin served in Afghanistan. Like, this issue was very close to me. And I'm on the board of the American University of Afghanistan. Like, educating women is extremely important to me. And so anyway, she got in touch with me, this young woman, and I was like, all right, I know what we're going to do. So I got Hillary Clinton to speak directly to her live on my show. And she told me that experience gave her the mental resilience to hang on when she didn't know what was going to happen. She didn't know what was going to happen. She actually likened it. She was like, I've read the Diary of Anne Frank, and I felt like Anne Frank, where I was like trapped in this house with like 8 people, and like there was, she was almost humorous. It was like dark humor, where she said, if I wrote a book about like what it was like being trapped in this safe house, like it's actually funny as much as it is sad. And so anyway, she managed to get out, and she said that is what helped her to keep going. And now she's, she's using her voice. She's writing. She's speaking, holding UN officials' feet to the fire, speaking truth to power. And I was like, okay, I need to amplify the voices of people like her. I need to give them a space where we can find them and train them. And at the same time, the BBC has been going through massive cuts. I mean, apparently they're going through cuts again. And they were like, we can't continue your series, even though it's award winning, even though it got me shortlisted for Anchor of the Year. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to continue it on my own. So Helmet to Heels. Actually,
Can't you go to NPR?
I mean, nobody has money now. This is the problem.
Right.
It's like everybody, like CNN. My bureau chief that I first boss
Obama
from
sent it all
NBC.
back to Iraq.
Yeah, I mean, there's no money for. There's just no money for news. It's terrible. It's really a problem. So basically, I'm using like commercial. I'm working on commercial mechanisms, particularly fashion and travel and beauty, and these brands that are kind of like conscious of gender equity to get them to fund. So that's what we're working on. We're looking for sponsors. We're working on brand deals. We want to continue the show. We're continuing through live events now. So like we did something at White House Correspondents' Dinner. We're doing something at UN General Assembly.
You live in Dubai, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I would think that I read his biography, MBS.
Yeah.
He's very pro women.
So he's done a lot for women. He has. I mean, I traveled to Saudi in 2015 and I did quite a lot of reporting on the ground there for like weeks on end, which is very difficult to do at the time before he was in charge. And actually, like, even though women didn't really have as much rights then, like you still had to wear a hijab and a abaya. Like I was embedded with the Saudi military when they started their Yemen campaign, their Yemen war. And so we had to have our like flak jacket and helmet on top of our hijab and our abaya, and it was like a bajillion degrees in the desert. But he has done so much to turn around social rights for women. But, at the same time, like the thing about these
that little Khashoggi issue kind of slowed down his PR campaign.
I mean, if that hadn't have happened, I really wonder what
Khashoggi was the reporter that went into the embassy to have a meeting and never emerged.
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
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 Why his fiance waited in the lobby.
Yeah, not good. Things could have been very different. They could have been very different.
So, Helmet to Hills is your podcast series. How many episodes have you done? How many? I see a book here.
So, I'm actually writing a book.
Okay.
So, Helmet to Heels is our platform where it's news, travel, fashion. The name came from a photo where I was packing and I had my outfit that I was going to wear to Capitol Hill kind of like set up. And I had my flak jacket and helmet and my boots and stuff that I was going to pack. And I looked over and I was like, oh, Helmet to Heels. That's what I was doing. I was going from a war zone to Washington. But I just snapped a photo. And this was 2014, back when like Instagram was still kind of new. And we all thought we were amateur Andy Warhols. And we just like Instagrammed. I mean, we just like filtered everything. It's like a filter. And I posted it. But I actually remember, I didn't remember until I recently went and dug this back. I made it like I posted on Facebook and I made it one of the cover photos. And I saw the comments on it. And like a couple people were like, yeah, let's get you a woman who can do both. Or like, this is so amazing, supportive, hype women. And then there were two who were colleagues who came in with some haterade. And yeah, one of them was
Were they women or men?
They were women.
What?
Don't you feel like that seems to be a trend, is that the people who are your peers and should be the most supportive of you are usually the ones that are the most like detrimental and just, hate.
And we don't talk about this. And I think the reason why we don't talk about it is because it's like, all right, you know what? It's like hard enough being a woman in corporate America. But I'm done with that because Tammy Duckworth, first of all, Tammy Duckworth is a badass. Do you guys know her? She is a badass. So she served in the military. She was injured. She lost her legs. I don't remember if it was both. Definitely one of them. She's in a wheelchair. And she spoke at the Foreign Policy Her Power Summit. And I covered Capitol Hill, so I knew her from Capitol Hill. She spoke at this Foreign Policy Her Power Summit in April. And she said something. She was like, people misbehave and act out and say things, like say inappropriate, rude, mean things, because they don't expect you to push back. And she was like, I'm not about that. Push back and call them out. And so I was thinking about this because I have, so it's like the 10-year anniversary of this photo, which now 10 years later, I've launched a company, a brand based off of this photo. And I was like, should I like X out their names? And I decided, you know what? No. No. You own the story. You own your story. If somebody doesn't like how they show up in your story, they should have treated you better.
Exactly.
They could have shown up in your story in a very different way. That was up to them. So
and been wearing a superhero cape, but instead they're hatergate.
Well, and how often because I just had this conversation with somebody the other day, is that we're told, oh, forgive and forget. Well, people often don't forget, and it's very hard to forgive and move past. And so I think people who say shitty things, for lack of a better word, are too quick to say, oh, I didn't mean what I said, or you knew exactly. We're in a day and age where the wrong thing said at the wrong time can get you canceled. So I think we're all hyper aware and hyper focused on the things that we do and we don't say. So if I'm not here to hold you accountable for your dialogue and you're not holding yourself accountable, then what are we doing?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, but it's hard, and you have to be brave, and you have to be willing to receive pushback, and people
you have to be relentless.
Yeah, I mean, that's Pompeo's favorite word to describe me. So, if that's the one word that goes on my gravestone, I'm totally here for it. But it's interesting. Speaking of forgiveness, I was on Michael Cohen's podcast yesterday, and obviously, talk about a relationship that went really sour, him and Donald Trump. I asked him, I said, would you forgive Donald Trump? And he said he would, but it was conditional, right? And I think this is the thing. I think people are capable of forgiving. I don't think we're capable of forgetting. I don't think you forget. I don't think you ever really forget.
I don't think you should forget.
I don't think you should either, because if you forget, then it can happen again. Then you can.
But you can not hold resentment in your heart.
Yeah.
But still hold that memory dear, because that's what protects you going forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, having the awareness of what somebody's true character is. Like, if they're capable of doing this, and saying all the time, actions, of course, speak louder than words. You can say all of these things, but how do you act towards other people as humans? Like those people who left nasty comments, have they been present in your life? Have they uplifted you in any sort of way since then?
And if you tried to pay your bills with their opinions, it doesn't work.
Yeah. No.
Well, thank you so much, Suzanne. And with that being said, I will
say goodnight, Lucy.
Good night, Lucy.